Nice. Sean, I know we talked a little bit before, but still kind of like introduce yourself a little bit.
Eric, I appreciate you, man. One, I appreciate you having me. This is a great opportunity. Two busy people trying to connect, so I'm glad we're able to do it. Yeah, Sean Johnson, a physical therapist. I'm a orthopedic and sports physical therapist. I've been a physical therapist for over 17 years. Spent the first 9 years of my career at the University of Southern California as clinical faculty. Um, then from there, with the at USC, I was involved in both clinical practice as well as teaching the program, which was a tremendous opportunity and honor and a true joy to be able to do that. And I tell people that I've been fortunate enough to have kind of two dream jobs, if you will, or two dream stages of my career, because that was a dream to be a part of that. And then from there, I transitioned to baseball, professional baseball, where I worked with the Los Angeles Angels as a major league physical therapist and assistant strength and conditioning coach for 4 seasons. Then spent a season with the Seattle Mariners in a leadership position, manager of athlete care. Then did some private work in the private sector and cash sector, working with clients privately for 2 years. And then now just finished my first season in the NBA as a physical therapist at the Portland Trailblazers. One of three physical therapists for the Portland Trailblazers.
Nice, nice, nice. So, before we dive into like the basketball world, like, can you share a little bit your experience in baseball? Because obviously, like basketball and baseball are very different. So maybe can you share like what kind of injury you're dealing with when you work with baseball teams, and how does that help you, like when you work at basketball right now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So regardless of the sport, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, football, soccer, MMA, whatever, you have to understand the demands of said sport, right? And then the demands of that sport on the athlete. And that's important for a variety of reasons. One, it's the demands of the sport that lead to stress to the tissue that can then lead to injury, pathology, etc. But then also from a performance side of things, it's the athlete's ability to overcome those demands and navigate those demands that allows them to be successful on the court or the field or in the swimming pool or whatever the case is. And so clearly, baseball and basketball, there are inherently differences in the demands of those sports, right? But I will say that to answer your question in terms of how it helped with my transition to basketball. So there is a lot of people associate overhead injuries with baseball because of pitching. And it is a very overhead dominant energy sport. But if you look at the position players and even the pitchers themselves, they'll experience a variety of injuries, especially to their trunk, their lower half, etc. And so there are those injuries, whether it be the groin strains, the oblique strains, ankle sprains, knee sprains, and or injuries that you see at a higher prevalence in basketball, that definitely help facilitate my ability to transition into the sport. As well as, and of course, when you have the athlete in basketball who's experiencing the shoulder injury or the elbow injury, and then feeling very comfortable with that as well. So there's definitely been some carryover and some transition between the two, although albeit there are different demands to the two sports.
Nice, nice, nice. So, uh, the following question would be like you mentioned, you work with Major League Baseball as a physical therapist and assistant strength coach.
Yes.
So it's kind of like a dual role. And I feel like nowadays with like pro sport, like especially I think like basketball and baseball, there's a lot of like strength coaches that have PT background or athletic trainer that have PT background. Like, how do you think that like your PT background help you as a strength coach?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the first thing I'll say is I have a ton of respect for all of the professions that I've had the pleasure to work with throughout my career. And I have a ton of respect for strength and conditioning coaches. And I'll never be one to say someone who has put energy into their craft and developed themselves as a strength coach and doing it for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, etc., I would never say that I have the ability and or the knowledge base that someone has in that world, right? I have too much respect for the profession to say that. I do have a passion for strength and conditioning. I do have a passion for a lot of the principles related to strength and conditioning. And we know that there's carryover between the profession of physical therapy and strength and conditioning. A lot of times we look at our profession of rehabilitation as physics and the science of physics on the human body because there's so much that we have to understand clinically in terms of tissue and the way tissue is loaded and the stress that can cause, and then how to rehabilitate that and then load that tissue appropriately. And so then there could be then some carryover into the strength and conditioning world related to loading and tissue loading, et cetera. And so the understanding from a clinical standpoint of, as I just mentioned, tissue loading, the physics behind that, and the movement associated with that has then helped my ability to facilitate working with athletes from a S&C standpoint. And then there's two ways that can transpire. One could be return to play, where it's an athlete who's been injured and they're not active. And then it's one of my responsibilities, whether it be when I was in the baseball world or now in the basketball world, to then work with an athlete to get them back to playing again in that return to play process. And a part of that is there's a phase of that that's going to have a huge component of strength and conditioning principles to it. Early on, whether it's post-surgery or early on with an acute injury, the tissue's too inflamed or irritated where you can't load at a high level. And there is a range of motion focus. There is a pain modulation and pain management focus. And then after that, you have a neuromuscular focus where you're waking muscles up. You're working on coordination and control. But then the next phase after that is when the loading really starts to happen. And that's when you have a lot of carryover between the medical side and the strength and conditioning side. And so one aspect of my career and journey has been that, just the return to play and then using strength and conditioning principles related to the return to play component. The other aspect is it's the healthy athlete who's not injured and it's someone who's just going through their normal lift. And when I was with the Angels, I had the ability to participate as that in that aspect as well, where I'm working alongside the other strength coaches and I'm just taking a very healthy athlete through their loading. And I've learned so much from that and learned so much from my colleagues in doing that. Currently, within my role with the Trailblazers, it's more truly that return to play component and less of the part that I just mentioned, working with the healthy athlete, which is still fantastic. But I definitely think that work in my training as a clinician and as a physical therapist did facilitate some of my ability to feel more comfortable in the weight room or just more comfortable when it comes to loading the athlete at an optimal level.
Nice, nice, nice. So, uh, like I mentioned earlier, there's more and more like these dual credential like roles in pro sports.
Right.
So, if you like, this is me personally asking this question though. So, like I'm a pure like strength coach. I don't have like PT background or like AT background. So, in your opinion, how can like guys like me separate themselves from others since there are already like a lot of like guys that are dual credential?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And just so I'm making sure that we're on the same page with that question and understand that question, when you say separate yourself, does that mean as it relates to athlete care? Does that mean as it relates to future opportunities and the progression through your career? Like, what do you mean by that separation for yourself?
I'll probably say the separation means future opportunity, getting a job, getting hired. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I think, it's not just for someone like yourself who is a strength and conditioning coach, it's for all of us. It's the physical therapist, the athletic trainer, the strength and conditioning, dietetics, massage, whoever the case, right? When you work in the high performance domain or the health and performance domain, it's the team within the team. And there's so many different disciplines within that. And it's a highly competitive environment. And I think that there's a lot of people that would like to have those jobs, right? I've heard the quote before, and it's one of my new favorite quotes. There's the I get to job versus I have to job. The job that is the essence of an opportunity and you get to do it and you're fortunate to have it versus it's a requirement or obligation you have to do it, right? And I there's not a day that goes by that I don't understand the blessing of having the opportunities that I've had throughout my career and that I currently have, and I don't take it for granted. But to then circle back to your point about what separates yourself, I think one is continuing to hone into your craft, right? I can tell that you're a passionate individual and being able to continue to lean into that passion that you have, as well as continue to dive into the education and the science of what it is that you do. Because all of us, again, whether it's the strength coach or the physical therapist or whoever, we all should be lifelong learners, right? The worst thing that can happen is to allow yourself to become dated or outdated. And that means pushing yourself through the literature and the research that's out there and being current with that. That means the continued education and the coursework that you can take and learning the newest techniques and the newest philosophies and concepts related to your craft. And so that passion, that the ability to continue to be a student. And then the other thing that's huge, that's similar to that idea of continuing to be a student, is that willingness to continue to check your ego. When I first joined the Angels, my very, very first season, back in 2017, I had an athlete who was a vet at the time. He'd been in baseball for over a decade. And it was early. We had just finished spring training. The season was just getting started. And it just happened to just be him and I in the training room. And we are just talking. And one of the things he said within the conversation was, Sean, the biggest thing that you can do every single day, because we have a lot of games, is every day that you hit this. And in baseball, it's not, they don't call it a locker room, they call it a clubhouse. Every day that you hit this clubhouse, be willing to check your ego at the door. And literally, you walk in the clubhouse door, but your ego stays. And that's always resonated with me. And I think it's easier said than done. And what I would add to that is that again, this concept of the get to job, and it's an opportunity, and it's the cool jobs, if you will, right? Oftentimes I find that unfortunately, it's the people who have these jobs who can have the biggest ego in the room, more so than the athlete. People ask me all the time, well, what is it like working with athletes and do they have egos and stuff? Well, I kind of feel like an athlete should have an ego, right? If there's 5 seconds left on the shot clock or 5 seconds left in the game, you want to have the ball in your hands to hit that game-winning shot. It takes a little bit of confidence, a little bit of ego to have that. It's the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs in a full count, and you're at the plate. You have to have that confidence in yourself to hit it, and hit, whether it be a home run or knock in the driving run. The court, whatever it is, that ability to want to win and make the play. And so I admire the quote unquote ego that our athletes have. What I don't admire is the ego that we tend to sometimes have in terms of providing care to the athlete. We shouldn't have an ego because it's not about us, it's about them. But oftentimes it is a very ego driven environment, whether it be the know it all energy or the competitive energy, people trying to compete with each other. The only time there's a competition is getting the job, whether it be through the interview process or et cetera. But once you have the job, you are now a part of a team within the team, and you should be willing to collaborate at a high level and not compete, right? You hear people with these positions all the time that say, my athlete, I love work with my athlete or my athlete this. And I think that is an energy also centered around ego. And so, not to overly bewilder that point, but I think it's such an important one. And I think that ability to, as I mentioned, lifelong learner, maintain your passion, but then check that ego and truly understand what that looks like and what that means, and then make it about the athlete and providing the highest level of athlete care possible. That to me is the separator, and that's what's going to separate yourself.
Nice, nice, nice. I love it. I love it. So after after your journey with baseball and like you meant like where you are right now, you currently work with basketball. So when you work with basketball athlete, like they probably already know that you mainly work with baseball before. So how do you get instant buy-in with those like basketball athletes?
That's a really good question, right? And I'm not the first to do it. There's a colleague of mine that I was talking to about this years ago who transitioned to basketball before I did, and we had a conversation, and he was telling me how kind of joking around we're in the locker room, people call him the baseball guy. Um, it's not uncommon. It could go either way, right? There's people who work in the NFL that end up in Major League and et cetera, right? You got people that go to the W or work in, boxing or whatever the case is, right? Even my boss was a very successful clinician in boxing for many, many years and still has the connection to boxing. The way I look at it is a couple things. One, it's kind of like, I was having a great conversation with our director of player development today, and we were just talking about the concept of the young athlete and how they're very focused and myopic in their training and in their sport. So it's the baseball kid who only does the travel ball, or the basketball kid that only does AAU as an example, and they don't expose themselves to other sports. And that there's value, right, in being able to expose yourself to different sports as it relates to athleticism, as it relates to coordination, as it relates to control, injury prevention, and not developing overuse injuries, and then just burnout. Well, just like exposing someone to different sports can be of value, being the person working within sports, being the clinician and exposing myself to different sports can also help me in my process. It diversifies the exposure to the human being and to the athlete that I'm working with. It creates this clinical library of different presentations that can help me when I then see someone, oh, I've seen this injury before. Whether it's in a different sport, that's fine. I've seen them before, and I can kind of tap into that experience. And so I think that the diversity of exposure that makes me that much more of better equipped to handle some of the cases that I've seen. And so these are some of the conversations that I'll share, with my athletes as it relates to coming from a different role in a different sport. And I think, a lot of them are able to appreciate that. The other thing that's interesting is, there's one athlete, there's a few athletes who enjoy in our locker room who enjoy baseball, and so it's a way in which we can connect and kind of bond, right? So that's the thing as well. But all in all, I think that diversity helps me, and pushes me and helps me and allows me to provide a higher level of athlete care, because of experience, and I just express that with the athletes that I work with.
Cool, cool. So, uh, like you mentioned earlier, when you work with baseball, there's some groin injury or there's a like oblique strain, and those kind of injury probably also show up in basketball too. So I want to start by asking your protocol or like your maybe how do you manage like groin injury?
Mhm. It's a great question, and I'm not going to ignore this question, but there's another thought that came to my mind that was related to the previous question. I just
Okay,
want
okay, okay.
to well, because it was such a good question that you asked. So not just the exposure to different sports, but I think the exposure to different settings just in general is important. And the reason why I bring this up, and again, I have a very clinical focused mind because I'm a clinician first. So let's just kind of look at the physical therapist as an example, or the medical provider, athletic trainer, or whatever the case is, physician. But as a physical therapist, right, within our profession, we see more and more people in this current landscape who are going directly into professional sports at a younger stage in their career. And that's amazing. I'm happy for them. I think it's fantastic. Um, but there's pros and cons to everything. And so if you're someone who graduates from physical therapy school, maybe does a sports residency and then goes right into professional sports, now your experience in that library that I just talked about, that also isn't necessarily as diverse potentially. You don't have as much exposure, right? Versus someone who maybe works in clinical practice a little bit or works in different settings in addition to different sports that then can potentially enhance your exposure and your clinical experience in library that you have to lean on. And so I will say that again, it's an amazing opportunity. And I think it's outstanding if someone is able to then transition from school or residency or fellowship directly into a sport, a professional sports setting. especially in the early stage in their career. But then I also then would say then that individual should then be willing to challenge themselves if they have the bandwidth and time, maybe in their off season, to put themselves in a clinical environment to see different athletes, or excuse me, different presentations, different diagnoses, pathologies, etc. There's a friend of mine who's been in the NFL for well over a decade, someone that I highly respect, has a brilliant mind, and he did this. He went directly from a sports residency and started his career, went right into the NFL. And so the first few years of his career, he would, during his offseason, spend some time in the clinic to kind of further develop that clinical exposure. So I do think that's important. And for the younger listeners to your podcast, whether it be the young strength coach, the young physical therapist, or the young clinician in general who's in school or just starting out, that's something that they should keep in mind as well.
Nice, nice. This is actually really awesome because I remember a few days ago, Jess Ellis, shout out to Jess Ellis, that he actually mentioned the same thing in his Instagram story, right? He
Mhm.
said nowadays there's more and more young clinician that like probably just finish their residency and just go to pro sport
Right.
or work with athlete. That's a good thing and a bad thing. Like you
Yep.
mentioned, they don't have like enough diversity or like they don't really have because you work with pro athlete, you can't really make mistakes, right?
Yes.
So it's hard for them to learn or to gain more like experience on those stuff. This is really cool. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I mentioned I'm one of three physical therapists for the Trailblazers. All three of us are fortunate to be experienced clinicians, right? So me and another individual went to school together, so we've both been out for 17 years. And then the other therapist has been out for over a decade, and she's outstanding as well. And so it's unique in that the three of us come in with this energy and this diversity within our background, and it allows for some very good, lively conversations where we can learn from each other and kind of pick each other's brains, but also just the energy that we're able to put into athlete care. So again, I think it's great for the young clinician who can get in right away, but then just push yourselves and challenge yourselves to make sure that you're giving yourself what you need to provide that athlete with the highest care possible. And then as that segues into your question about groin strains, as I mentioned before we get started, I can't give away all the secrets, right, and all the details. But I will say that within our process and then just in general, there's something that's said and important about tissue loading. And I think that, you know, for years, when it came to, and let's just put even the concept of groin strain on hold, just injury in general, there was this energy and this concept of protection. No, we have to protect the tissue. We have to protect the joint. And there is a certain stage to that, but the problem is if you stay in that stage too long, right? So then what happens is if you stay in that protective energy too long, one, the human being, the patient or the athlete, now they start to develop the potential for fear avoidance, right? Which is a natural phenomenon. So now they themselves become afraid to load the tissue, right? And they become apprehensive or fear avoidant. But then two, the tissue itself cannot develop the capacity that's needed because one of the things that we know is correlated with injury is failure. The tissue fails. And why does the tissue fail? Because it doesn't have the capacity to withstand a certain load. And so it can lead to failure, right? And so if we're not then loading the tissue that was injured, are we then giving it the capacity to withstand the load that happens in the sport? And so then as we circle back to the groin strain, one, I think understanding, because groin is a umbrella term, right? But there's a lot of tissue within the quote unquote groin. Most oftentimes when people hear the word groin, and we're going to be a little bit technical and think about our anatomy, they're thinking about the muscle called the gracilis, which is the most medial aspect of the groin. But in addition to the gracilis, you have the adductors, and there's three of them: longus, brevis, and magnus. And those are like the powerhouse of the adductor region. And then even some anatomists and some biomechanists look at the medial aspect of semimembranosus, which is the medial hamstring, as a part of the adductor bundle, almost like a fourth adductor. So then one, we have to understand and know, well, what part of that tissue has been lesioned so that we can then treat it and then load it appropriately in our progression. Two, I think there's some value in starting tissue loading. So similarly with the groin, with isometric load. I think the value of isometric load is, and for your audience, there's three types of muscle contractions in the human body. There's isometric, there's concentric, and there's eccentric. Concentric is the traditional movement. So it's the classic bicep curl. You have the dumbbell in your hand, you lift the dumbbell up towards your shoulder. The muscle of the bicep is shortening as you're loading it, as the weight's moving. It's a concentric contraction. Eccentric, and for those, meatheads, I tell people all the time I'm a recovering meathead, okay? Because, nothing I used to love to do more was to lift weights. Loved it, right? So, for the meatheads in the room, a lot of people use the term negative. Eccentric is same bicep example, the dumbbells in my hand. I'm slowly lowering the weight away from my shoulder. And with that slow lowering, with gravity, the muscle's lengthening, but still contracting. That's eccentric. And then the third muscle contraction is isometric. That is just me with an elbow bent and holding the dumbbell, not moving. Now I'm having to use the bicep to hold the weight, but my bicep muscle's not moving. So it's isometrically contracting. Now, of the three types of muscle contractions, what we know is that the isometric muscle contraction elicits the most, what we call neuromuscular recruitment. That is the recruitment of the myofibers or the muscle cells and the tissues of the muscle. The analogy I like to use is walking into a dark room, and that was me snapping my fingers, hitting the light switch, and the lights come on, right? So when the light comes on and you hit the light switch, you have electricity that goes to the light bulb, and boom, the light comes on. Well, it's the same thing with our nervous system and our body, where the brain is that light switch that sends firing through the nerves into the muscle cells, and wakes the muscle up. And that process is a recruitment of the nerves, but also the cells of the muscles that elicit the contraction. And we know that with the isometric contraction, you have the most elicitation of that firing. Now, the other thing that's advantageous about starting with an isometric contraction is, again, there's no movement. So a strain is when the muscle's torn. It's like taking your favorite t-shirt and you tear it because you're playing around and wrestling. It has a little tear in it, and then now your mother washes it over and over again, and the hole in the shirt gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you keep wearing it. So a strain is a literal tear to the tissue or ripping of the tissue. And there's different grades, right? And for in the groin strain world, it's usually grades 1 through 3. So now what can happen is if you're moving that tissue, especially in the early stages of loading, you could be exacerbating that tear and irritating that tear, just like your mom washing her favorite shirt. So the isometric contraction allows for the recruitment and the contraction of the muscle without that tissue moving, thus not eliciting or aggravating the tear itself. So it starts early loading and waking the muscle up and firing the muscle without aggravating the muscle. Plus, what we know is with injury, there could be an inhibition to the muscle. The muscle can't sometimes fire as easily. So it starts to wake that process up because, again, isometric has the highest number of muscle recruitment in the muscle cells. So then going through that phase of isometrics, then the next phase that you would still take the athlete through would potentially be some eccentric work. We talked about eccentrics being those negatives, and we know that of the three types of muscle contractions, eccentric creates the most load and the most effort of the muscle. So you have a muscle that's torn and injured, maybe not firing. You start to fire it with isometrics. You start to load it and wake it up. But then now we got to get it stronger to develop the capacity. And so if we know that the eccentrics creates the most work out of the muscle, that can start to elicit some strength gains. So this is when someone is asymptomatic, there's no irritability, they've tolerated all the isometric work, they have full range of motion, they're progressing nicely without setbacks, no swelling, inflammation, all those types of things, right? And then now you're starting to be able to up the ante a little bit with some of the eccentric work and loading. And not only will that help load through the muscle belly, but even some of the tendinous junctions of the muscle as well to build the capacity of not only the muscle, but where the muscle connects to the tendon. And then from there, you can start to work on some concentric. And that's nice to pair with quicker movements and the power because athletes aren't statues. So they have to be able to move. And so then that's when you start to work on some of the concentrics and transition to some quicker movements, maybe some early plyometrics, some low intensity plyometrics, some plyometric work. Then that starts to tend to transition the athlete onto the court or onto the field or whatever the case is, as they then work and navigate through some of their basketball specific, sport specific related activities. Functional work will also start to be, highly into play, triplanar work and those types of things, in these kind of last couple of phases as well. So it's more of a big picture view. There could be a lot more detail related to that, but that's one of the ways I would navigate that. That's how I'd look at that.
I feel like the framework you just mentioned, like kind of also uh you can put this framework into like different injury, even like Achilles tendon stuff. Am I
Yes,
correct?
right. That's exactly right. And there's been so much work that's looked at the Achilles tear and just tears in general, whether it be tendinopathies or whether it be actual tendon tears and lesions. If you look at the tendinopathy, right, the Achilles, we know that the Achilles is the biggest tendon in the human body, followed by the patella tendon, and there's a tremendous amount of load that goes through both tendons. Way back in the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, there was a huge kind of energy and focus on some of the eccentric loading and training. And then there was this push of, well, wait a minute, what about isometric work? And then, okay, well, can we do both? Maybe isometrics come first. And then now some people that says it depends on the human, it depends on the athlete. Maybe you start with isos and go eccentric. Maybe you can still start with eccentrics. Maybe again in programming, you do a little bit of both. But we know that there's some good loading that comes with what we talk about, especially as it relates to time over tension, which is similar to some of the eccentric stuff we're talking about, where it's loading tissue over a tempo, a more slower and controlled tempo that leads to, again, loading through the muscles, loading through the tendons, good co-contraction where you have multiple muscle groups that are being loaded, especially if it's a multi-joint movement. Something like a trap bar deadlift or something along those lines, or a rear foot elevated where multiple joints are moving and it's tempoed and it's controlled. And now you get that co-contraction, which helps to stabilize the lower half.
Nice, nice. I love it. I love it. So outside the injury or growing pain, or like obviously you have like you mean 17 years of like experience as a physical therapist or and a strength coach. So what are some like topics you're currently interested or you're trying to learn right now?
Everything. Everything. No, yeah, in all honesty, I've learned more. Like each new year of my career is like, okay, I say the same thing every year. This is the year I've learned the most, right? And people think, oh, okay, it's so I was fortunate enough to do an orthopedic residency out of grad school, and I learned a ton within my residency, and I have no regret in doing it. And I would do it all over again. And so then people would assume, okay, that must have been the year that you learned the most in your career, or it's your first year removed from residency and you're a young clinician, a new professional, or maybe it's your first year in baseball, or first year in professional sports. The bottom line is each year it's like this is the year I've learned the most in my career. And it's because of either the people that I'm surrounded by who are elite, the athletes who challenge me, and the patients who challenge me. It's the new stuff I've exposed myself to, whether it be Con Ed and those types of things. But there's so much to learn out there. I definitely have a passion equally. I think again, not to get on a tangent and move too far away from your original question, but just this concept of, okay, well, Sean, what is it that you want to learn next, and all those types of things. I have a passion related to a lot of the manual work I do and all the table stuff, but I have an equal passion for the therapeutic exercise and the tissue loading. And sometimes within this world, people kind of make it either or. So I'm the clinician or I'm the person where you're going to be on the table for a short period of time, and we got to get you up and moving. Or I'm the person where we're going to spend, 2 hours on the table and then maybe a little bit of exercise. And my thought is it doesn't have to be an either or type of thing. You have to be able to meet the athlete where they're literally at. And that could be where they're literally at in their stage of return to play, or where they're at in their career, or in the season, or just that particular day, and be willing to provide what's needed for that athlete, whether it may be a little bit more table time, maybe a little bit more loading, maybe a combination of the two. And so as a result, because I do have a passion in both areas, I'm continuing to learn and challenge myself as it relates to whether it be the manual work that I have the opportunity to do, or the tissue loading and the therapeutic exercise that I'm involved with as well.
Nice, nice. I love it. So, uh, I got a question not related to this. Is like with all those years of experience, right? Working with athlete, teaching, whatsoever, have you ever been in like a situation or have you ever have like 1 or 2 years that you feel like um this is probably not what you thought it's going. This is not what you want it to be, or like some sort of maybe people use like the word failure. Have you ever encountered that, and how do you kind of deal with those situations?
No, absolutely. 100%. I think that's a part of the journey, right? I'm a big quote guy, and some of the stuff I love might even sound cliche, but there's a famous quote out there: "You win and you learn," right? And when you quote unquote lose, it's an opportunity to learn, right? Um, I don't think there's a human being on this planet. I don't care if it's the Michael Jordans of the world, or the LeBron James or whoever, like the most successful of the successful, that haven't experienced some element of failure in their journey where things didn't go the way they wanted it to go. And of course, I've been in those situations, and it's helped facilitate some of my goals and allow me to push myself more, or just giving me an opportunity to learn and grow, right? There's one, particular moment that comes to mind where I told you that I spent the first 9 years of my career at the University of Southern California. And I have nothing but love for my alma mater where I went to graduate school at. Again, I was full-time faculty there for 9 years after I graduated. I'm so connected and still have a passion for USC that I was a part of a team that created a physical therapy biokinesiology Black Alumni Association for the program, the first in the history of its kind within the country, right? Because I have that connection and that passion for my program. But I will also say that in that initial journey, in that first part of my career, when I graduated from residency, my goal wasn't to go into professional sports. My goal was to stay at USC. I wanted to have a long, long career of being a clinical faculty member, seeing patients and teaching within the program. And then the ultimate goal was I wanted to be clinic director and run the faculty practice that I was working at as a young clinician. And so it's interesting because when I finished my residency, there wasn't an opening for me at the time. So I stayed on to teach, but there wasn't an opening at the time for me to work in the clinic. So I was working at a great, clinic. Loved the clinic. I started my career at post residency, and then one of my mentors reached out to me and said, "Hey, Sean, we have an opportunity if you want to come full time to work for us." So took the opportunity, and I was at a barbecue for the graduating residents who had just graduated a year after I did, coupled with it was to welcome in the new residents. And at that barbecue, I saw my new boss, who was the current clinic director of the faculty practice. And as soon as I saw her, gave her a big hug, excited to be working with you again. And the next thing I said was, "I'm going to have your job one day." Sounds super arrogant, sounds super cocky. That's not how I meant it at all. The way I meant it was, I want to learn from you. I want to grow from you. I would love to be mentored. And so then that way, and obviously I expounded on it. We had that conversation. But so in that way, when you move to your next phase, you can pass the baton to me and I could be someone that be ready to take over for you. So now fast forward 9 years goes by, and indeed that individual who I have a ton of respect for is in a transition, and I was named interim director of the faculty practice. So here's my opportunity. This is what I've been working for. This is my primary first career goal. Let's do this. And so for essentially a year, I'm in this position of interim clinic director. Now, fast forward, a year goes by, and my one of my bosses says it's time to go through the process of seeing if we're going to remove this interim tag. So I go through a series of interviews, and then about 6 weeks or so after the interviews are completed, I hear from them that I wasn't going to be named clinic director, and I didn't get it. And it was an absolute gut punch, right? You know, all my people within my circle, again, cliches, all the sayings, when one door closes, another one opens. And it was sincere and I meant it and I felt it and it felt good to be loved on that way. But ironically enough, true to that saying, within 2 weeks after hearing that I wasn't going to become full-time director, that's when another mentor of mine who's with the Angels reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in interviewing with the Angels?" So that concept of when one door closes, another one opens, right? And so I think that's one, story of many in which there was an opportunity for where it didn't go the way I wanted it to. Um, but in life, you got to move forward. And I learned a ton about myself and just who I was, and it led to other opportunities. Um, Another example was, when I was with the Seattle Mariners, I was only there for a season. It wasn't the best fit. But again, I learned a lot about myself in that journey that's now helped me years later for not only what came immediately after that experience, but with where I'm currently at now. And it's helped to shape and grow and facilitate the human and the professional that I continue to aspire to be.
Man, I love it. I love it. I love it. So,
I appreciate that.
man, so my podcast used to be like we talk about very specific about like certain topics about training or rehab. But man, I love it because there's actually a lot like I actually talked to a lot of strength coaches or PT. They're young. They want to do like they want to be the best ever.
Yeah,
And like I feel like they will love this one. So last two things before I let go.
appreciate that,
So
man. Appreciate that. And
um
kudos to you for doing this. I think that there's people out there that need to hear from you and hear and benefit from this platform. So great job in putting this together.
appreciate you, man. So what would be um like you mentioned you want to be a director like faculty at USC, right? But you didn't get it. Then working with pro athlete. Like what were you thinking back then? Like
Mhm.
when you got the new opportunity and when you work with that job. What were you thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first part is again, when one door closes, another one opens. It's like you talk about going from one shift of emotion to another. And so just like, wow, this is life's about timing, and I believe that life is about seasons. And for many 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 years I didn't live somewhere where there was seasons, and now that I'm in Oregon I finally live somewhere again where there's seasons. But just like it could go from fall to winter, winter to spring, spring to summer, there could be different seasons of your life. And I truly do believe that as much as I love being at USC, that season of my life and career was coming to an end appropriately in a very healthy way. And then the Angels came along within a new season. And so that energy of feeling kind of it energized, and feeling this new feeling of passion and excitement about this new opportunity, coupled with literally it's new. I was fortunate to play college sports. I was a football player, a linebacker at a small university in South Dakota, University of Sioux Falls. Played football my whole young life growing up until I graduated from college. And so I have a level of comfort in the athletic world, but it's way different when you're on the other side of it. And I never worked in sports in college. A part of it was because when you're a football, especially, it's hard to kind of do that because the season's involved, and then you have spring ball, et cetera, and summer training. So this was when I started with the Angels. This was the literally the first time in my life where I was in the training room, not as the athlete, but someone working for the athlete. And it's a different energy, it's a different vibe. And that was definitely a little bit of a shock to the system. I had to acclimate myself to that. And I think for those of listeners that you have who are on the clinical side of things, and it's an example of physical therapists, this could be the benefit of doing something like a sports residency. So that way you start to expose yourself to the athletic training room, right? The beauty of athletic trainers and in that exposure to the athletic training room, the beauty of the strength coach who chooses to expose him or herself to the weight room in the athletic facility, right? And so that was definitely a shock to the system, but it was a good shock and a needed shock. And again, it was a part of the excitement because I am someone who doesn't just like, but loves challenges and pushing myself in that way. And so I think that was where my energy was and kind of where my head was in that transition. And it was a beautiful thing.
Nice, nice. So, like if I'm gonna ask you like what are like some advice for the young like strength coaches, young PT or young athletic trainer out there who want to be maybe who just want to be the best at where they can be, like if that makes sense. Who want to be
Yep.
the best athletic trainer, who want to be the best strength coach. What are some like advice you would give it to them?
So part of it is kind of some of the things I said to your earlier question, which was an excellent one as related to you personally, where it's maintaining passion. So if you're a young person, develop the passion first and being willing to kind of stay in that space of what passion looks like. It's so easy to sometimes lose the passion, especially within a long season, and you're tired and you're fatigued, and you start to forget about how you felt when you first got the job, right? So you don't want to lose that passion because there's a term, especially going back to my baseball days, that's used all the time, salty, where a person becomes salty, right? And I'm sure you people hear that in different sports as well. And it's like, well, why does that happen? Like you're in this amazing situation, in this amazing opportunity, and you're salty. That's someone who's lost their passion. So you have to find that passion and maintain that passion. And then the other two things I told you about being that lifelong learner, checking your ego out the door, right? Well, in addition to those, so again, maintaining your passion, lifelong learner, checking your ego out the door, making it about the athlete and not you. In addition to those, I think some other key ones are, and people sometimes are so locked in, which is a beautiful thing, into the development of their craft, whether it be processes, whether it be concepts, whether it be techniques and skills, whatever it is, they put energy into that, but then they forget about the development of the soft skills, right? Because the high performance department, the health and performance department, is literally the team within the team. And so, how is it that you're able to collaborate, communicate, connect, compromise with your teammate? And I think there's some really, really talented people that either don't get the job or lose the job because they don't know how to do that. And it's not in a manipulative way because you're trying to get somewhere or get over on someone. It's in a very sincere way of how can we connect and collaborate and build something together. And so I think, again, passion, lifelong learner, checking the ego at your door and making it about your athlete and not you, but that willingness to develop those soft skills that are so needed in this concept of being interdependent. And again, most people know what it means to be independent, and most people look at that as that's the goal. So when I finish college or start my career or grad school or whatever it is, or start making some money, I'm finally independent. But people should realize that there's this book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, written by Steve Conley, and I highly recommend it, where he talks about this concept of interdependence, where it's a journey along the spectrum. And independence is not the end goal, it's just the transition to the end goal. We all start dependent. We come into this world dependent as babies and children, and we literally are dependent on someone else. And that's one of the reasons why we want to push ourselves to get to be independent so we don't have to depend on other people. But that's just a stepping stone towards interdependence, where you have the ability to manage things yourself. You have the ability to take care of yourself, but you know how to connect with other people and team. And so I think, again, the development of those soft skills and recognizing interdependence is also a value. And then the final piece is imposter syndrome's a thing. So we know that imposter syndrome most commonly affects women and people of color, so minorities. And it's something as a young human being in grad school I experienced. There's a lot of us who do. And it's important to recognize that you're more than enough. It's important to recognize that you have the opportunities you have for a reason. To believe in yourself, believe in all that work you put in to being a lifelong student and all that skill development that you put in, and know that you're worthy of the opportunity and that you're worthy of providing the highest level of whatever it is that you're providing, care, expertise, whatever, and do that to the best of your ability with the belief in yourself that, again, you're worthy. Because again, imposter syndrome is a thing, and we don't want that to limit ourselves in our journey and what we're trying to get to and what we're trying to go. So that would be what I would say to someone who's younger and within your audience.
Nice. This is amazing. I appreciate you, Sean. Thank you for being
Appreciate you,
on.
brother. Yeah, 100%. Thank you for having me.